Stephen Phipson, you were there when Rachel Reeves was making her first official speech as Chancellor of the Exchequer. Can you please mark her card for us? What impressed you about it?
Well, I think the general tone of the speech, Nick, was very positive. And I think having many of her front bench colleagues sitting there, including the Deputy Prime Minister, in support, Johnny Reynolds, of course, from our perspective, very important for the manufacturing sector, all in support, was very positive. The feeling in the room, the kind of vibe that we got was of great optimism and positivity going forwards, which I guess you'd expect from a new government coming into the position. But then I did have the opportunity to speak beforehand with officials in the Treasury and found them too to be very optimistic and very positive about this, and had obviously been working all weekend with the Chancellor on some of the things that she announced today. So it was a very positive speech, very positive.
Obviously, one of the key planks of policy going forward is reform to the planning system. And that means everything from housing through to infrastructure, through to giant energy projects like wind farms. How does that in detail benefit the manufacturing sector?
Well, one of the things that we've been suffering from is rather anemic demand domestically. If we look at that over the last particularly the last 6 months or so, it's been very flat in our quarterly updates. And part of this is because of the lack of infrastructure builds that are going on. If you take housing, for example, we have a modular housing part of Make UK. These are building 3D modules or housing almost completely inside very large factories. There's been a big investment in that sector. And actually, the previous government's policies has meant that many of those have actually closed down or withdrawn from the market. This will see a re-stimulation of that kind of activity, which is very good. As we know, manufacturing relies on infrastructure. It's great producing parts, but we are struggling to get things around the country at the moment. And that ability for moving goods, the freight capacity that we need in this country, and the digital interconnectivity, all of these things, a lot of which depend on planning, are actually critical. The one thing that I really am passionate about, Nick, in the planning sense is, I mean, all of those things are important, but grid capacity is vital. And part of being able to extend our grid capacity are the planning constraints we've got about putting pylons up across the country, etc. And we need to double the capacity of the grid if we're going to get any closer to our net zero commitments and all of the manufacturing that falls out of that. So really important that we get that right. And I know that the Chancellor focused on the planning side. I get why that was on the housing position in particular, but the outcomes for us from that are very beneficial. And at the end of her speech, or towards the end of her speech anyway, she mentioned industrial strategy, which is absolutely vital as part of this going forwards.
Yeah, the industrial strategy, you and I have been talking about this for donkey's years, and now somebody is explicitly saying they have one and are going to be announcing the detail fairly soon. You must be pretty clued up as to what's going to be in it. Just tell us what that industrial strategy looks like from Make UK's point of view.
Well, we go back to 2010 when we had our previous industrial strategy, Nick, and that worked very well because the government chose sectors to invest in. We became the largest aerospace components manufacturing nation in the world as a result of the previous industrial strategy. We had sector deals around helping particularly automotive and steel and those deals about what to do about those in the longer term. It tied together our innovation approach, and we ended up with catapults, for example, which have been a great benefit to the manufacturing sector in the UK. And the skills agenda, one of the most important problems we've got to solve now is how we increase dramatically our vocational skills. And if you don't have an industrial strategy, you end up with departments making up their own priorities, and they're not aligned around a single vision about where to deploy those resources. So what we're looking for in a new comprehensive industrial strategy is that joining up of mission, that meaning that all these departments are working on the same objectives and the same outcomes, so that we can solve things like the skills problems that we've got in this country. We can decide which are our priorities. We can then attract investment into doing something about it. And in particular, that foreign direct investment. I've had probably nearly a dozen discussions over the last few months with chief executives of international corporations who have operations here in the UK. And they are looking at investing billions of pounds, where they're trying to make a choice between Germany, France, Spain, or the UK. And the one difference they put it as a challenge to me, Nick, is that we don't have a long-term plan. So they're not sure what they're investing in, because manufacturing investments are between 7 to 30 years in length. So for them to attract that FDI into our sector, it's absolutely vital that we set out clearly what those objectives are, what our priorities are, how the government's going to join together with all the different areas of department to make those things happen, and go back to having a proper plan. I mean, we can't just leave that to the free market economy as the previous government was trying to do, because guess what? Many of those other economies aren't free market economies anymore. We're seeing protectionism everywhere. So it's very important that we protect the interests of the UK, and it's a great opportunity then for domestic growth. That's going to be the key driver.
You mentioned foreign direct investment. The former governor of the Bank of England, Mark Carney, somewhat subtly lamented the fact that the UK economy seems to rely on the kindness of strangers. What about investing our own money in our own manufacturing sector, being a British founded economy, rather than just having to rely on the kindness of strangers?
Yeah, absolutely right. I think the challenge, and I would go down a little bit more granular than that, Nick. So I think I'm very supportive of these large international corporations investing in the UK. That's great at that top level, at that prime contractor level. But what we then want to see is investment in the supply chain. And this is the important domestic point. At the moment, our investment in our supply chain has been fairly low for the last 10 years, if you look at it. Lots of constraints. We've had all the other issues that we know about, energy prices, we've had the COVID problems, we've had all sorts of things. But it does mean that we are well below our strength in terms of investing in the supply chain. And the language we are going to see coming forwards, assuming we attract in those big investors at the top, which I think we're going to be doing under a new government, is about localization. This is about the change that's happening to bring back supply chains into the domestic area rather than relying on Asian imports and other imports. And this key about localization. How do we incentivize local investments to build that supply chain is going to be absolutely key in the next couple of years as part of this government's push, Nick.
Stephen Phipson, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Nick.